Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mystical Awakenings. Um, we are hosting these classes to bring forth enlightenment. My name is Yvette, and I'm here with Susan, my spiritual teacher, and we're going to continue our classes in the Soul's Path.
All right, so this is class 3, part 2, because we're still talking about the soul. We were talking about the soul in the last class, the maturity levels of the soul. And this is part 2, and it is called the 7 Faces of the Soul. Most of this information comes from my spiritual teacher, Lazarus, and he says that at one time on the planet, everybody knew this information. And it's a very important aspect of the spiritual journey. We are not just bodies. We are incarnated souls, basically. All of us have a soul. And as I said earlier, the soul is our feminine aspect. And the feminine aspect is all about emotion. It's all about love. The soul is a loveaholic. And it's all about, when you think of the feminine energy, it's about community, it's about partnership, it's about family, it's about including everyone and trying to improve the lives of everyone. Um, the masculine energy is, of course, all about competition and comparison and getting to a goal and the intellect. So it's very different energy than the masculine energy. And the goal is to put the two together and to live in balance instead of just goal being to make bombs to kill everyone. The feminine says that's not a good idea. A lot of innocent people are going to die.
Yeah.
So anyway, this class is called the Soul's Path, and this teaching is literally ancient. And like I said, few people really know about it. So the soul goes through certain events in each and every lifetime. There is no one that does not have a soul's path. There is no lifetime in which you have not followed this blueprint. So knowing what the blueprint is very important if you're here to understand yourselves. Um, there are specific events that surface at certain times of a human being's lifetime. The first face of the soul is called the name. And the name obviously surfaces when you're born and you are given your name. The name is coming to you from your soul, and Lazarus says it's telepathically communicated to your parents. And it doesn't matter if your name is exactly the same name as your dad's name or your mom's name with a junior added to it or whatever, it's still a name that has been given to you by your soul. And the name holds a specific meaning related to your destiny. Once you understand your destiny, then your life begins to make sense. So it has nothing to do with numerology. A lot of people know that the name, each letter of the alphabet has a letter attached to it, and you can do certain numerological things related with your name, but this is not that. This is the meaning of the name. And most people have at least 2 names, and many people have 3 or 4 names. And these are the names given you at birth. It does not include your birth name. If you decided to change your name later on in life, it doesn't include that. It only includes the name given you at birth. And so if you have a first name, you will be looking up the meaning of your first name. If you have a second name, you will look up the meaning of your second name. And then if you have a third or fourth name or a last name, you will be looking up the meaning of each name individually. And then once you have looked up the meaning of each name, you'll be putting it all together to create a singular meaning. And you have to be intuitive to do this. You have to understand symbolism to do this. You have to use your imagination to do this. But what you come up with will be something that you can resonate with. wow, my name indicates this about me, and I totally resonate with it. If
Mm,
you're not resonating with it, then you probably haven't found the right meaning. So, what I'm going to do now is to share with you the meaning of my name to give you an idea how this is done. And then I'll have Yvette share with you the meaning of her name to give you, just as another example, basically. So, my name is Susan Christine Vaughn. That's so three names. Susan is a French word. It's also comes from the Hebrew, and then way back it comes from Egypt. And the word Susan means lily or um, lotus. So there
mm,
are two options of a flower, lily and lotus. Now, since I've got the word lily, then I had to go back on the internet and what is the symbolism of lily, right? Well, lily is a plant that grows from a bulb and it emerges at Easter time in the spring. And so everyone has heard of Easter lilies with all the symbolism related to that. And it is, in a sense, symbolic of the resurrection, right? Because that's what the Easter is all about, resurrection. So, keeping that in mind, I then move on to my next name, and my middle name is Christine. Well, that is a feminine word for Christ. And what is Christ symbolic of? Well, you could think of about a million things that Christ is symbolic of, but ultimately it's about crucifixion and resurrection,
mm,
right? My last name is Vaughn, and this is a Welsh word in the Welsh language that is a diminutive term like lily, like chica and chico in Spanish means little boy or little girl, right? And so in the Welsh language, it means little. And so I put all these names together. So the little, so obviously it's going to be little resurrected Christ. So with the name, there is always polarity. Anytime you're dealing with the soul, you're dealing with polarity. So it can be the positive polarity of that name could be the little resurrected Christ, or in the negative polarity, it could be the crucified Christ.
mm,
Okay. And so when I look at myself after being on my spiritual journey virtually all of my adult life, since the age of 38 and I'm 70, and I have been completely and totally focused on my spiritual journey. But more than that, I've been focused on understanding reality creation and how it is humans create their reality from the unconscious mind. That has been all encompassing for me, something that I focused on for years and years and years now. And what I have been trying to do during that 30-year spiritual journey is to heal myself. Because in the beginning of my journey, I had a lot of shame. I had a lot of victim consciousness. I had no idea that you create your own reality. I blamed my parents for my problems. I blamed other people, just like most people in the world. And during my spiritual journey, I learned how to take responsibility. I learned how to end my shame. I learned how to overcome victim consciousness and blame. I learned how to rewire my brain into higher consciousness. So when I look at those three words, the little resurrected Christ, I see that I have worked my entire spiritual journey is about been about ascending into higher consciousness. And how do I do that? By overcoming my victim consciousness. So that in the negative polarity, my name could have meant the little crucified Christ.
mm,
And how would I have created a reality of the little crucified Christ? I would have stayed in victim consciousness, right? I would have blamed my problems on other people. I wouldn't have rewired my brain. I wouldn't have any of this higher thought that has helped me shift into a higher vibration. Does that make sense,
yeah. Yeah.
Yvette?
It makes a lot of sense. And you know how we looked up my name previously. I still, because I'm still very young, I might not know. I mean, I can map out and have use my name as a guide, but I won't really know how it reflects in my whole adult life even. Um,
I think you'll be surprised myself.
really, yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's exciting. I definitely I'm gonna have to look into it more because I just
Mhm.
figured out like the meanings and everything. I wanna,
Mhm.
like you did, you pieced it together to create like a whole word and you looked up the symbolism and kind of
Mhm.
looked deeper into that. I definitely want to do something like that and then
Mhm.
kind of have use it as like a guide almost. It's kind of like,
Mhm.
I mean, I can relate to it when I do bone readings or when I read tarot. Like, the card could say one thing, but in relation to the whole spread of cards, it could mean something a little different and,
Yeah.
kind of string out like that.
Mhm. Well, do you want to share the meanings of your name?
Yes. So we looked up. My first name is Yvette, and that means it's originated it has a French origin, and it means yew tree. And we looked that up, and that means death and resurrection. So that would be the first name. Middle name is Monet, which is also French, and it means to be heard. And then my last name, Esquilo, there was a whole bunch of meanings for that one, but it it said as somebody whose goal is to head towards spiritual enlightenment.
I suspect the meaning of that name is similar to Christ, right? Because resurrection means to overcome. In
Mhm,
the Christian terminology, overcome the cross,
mhm,
right? So in that spiritual tradition, Jesus died. He was put in a cave,
mhm.
right? And he died horribly.
Yeah,
He was murdered and tortured,
yeah,
and he was able to overcome his death to resurrect.
mhm,
So I think it's going to be something similar
mhm,
to the meaning of Christ.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. I gotta
Is
look
it?
more into what a yew tree, like
Mhm,
maybe like the origin of it, and how, like, I don't know, more symbolism on it and the history of it.
mhm,
But
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, because the yew tree has a lot of symbolism
Mhm.
attached to it. And then your middle name, to be heard, right? Is it to be heard? And
Yeah.
tell me again your last name, what it means. What is your last name?
One that basically whose goal is to reach spiritual enlightenment.
Right. So that's obviously what you're doing right now
Mhm.
and have been doing way before you started working with me 6 months ago.
Mhm.
Right? Your whole investigation, you're reading the Bible, you're reading other spiritual texts. I mean, how many kids in their teenage years do that?
Right. I don't know any.
Yeah, exactly. And also your work with the tarot, that's another spiritual tradition that, Christians would say that's evil, but I just see it as a tool
Mhm.
to greater enlightenment, to get you in touch with your intuition.
Yeah.
And if you're not in touch with your intuition, you can't really be spiritual. You can be religious and
Mhm.
follow the teachings of a somebody else's rules, religious rules, but you can't really connect with the God within yourself
Mhm. Yeah.
unless you have a certain amount of intuition and imagination and the ability to hear something and get something out of it.
Mhm.
Your name means to to have a strong focus on being heard in relationship to your spiritual journey. And when you do that, you resurrect or overcome the cross that you carry, which is, and I know this about you because we've talked for 6 months, you're a bit shy,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If you don't overcome that shyness, you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. No,
You will
I
be
can see how it
you'll be in
relates.
the negative polarity of
Mhm.
your soul's path.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally understand that because then again with YouTube, I mean, I know we took a 2-week break. Um, I was thinking, I was like, oh, maybe I should try to record something. And I was like, what would I even talk about? Oh, what if and then it was kind of like the fear. I was very fear based. And I'm like, what? I don't have time anyway. And I did.
Right.
And I was like, eventually that's my goal. but
Hmm.
I'm still kind of rooted in that shyness and that level of, oh, like, what if I don't have anything to say, or
Exactly. That's all that victim consciousness and that limited thinking that our society gives us.
yes.
That we all have to overcome that if we're going to make anything of our lives.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. I can very much see that in my life.
Yeah. And so that's what you are going to have to overcome to become the person that God intends you to be
Mm. Yeah. Mm.
and that you want to be, because that's a driving force. This is the driving force. Like I said, I've spent 30 years totally focused on learning reality creation. I
Mhm.
want to know how I am creating these diseases. I want to know how I created all this shame, this victim consciousness, and what I need to do about it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's what my life has been about.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a question. So for example, people who have the same name as their mom or their dad, the same first, middle, and last, does that mean that they have the same path if they would have the same meaning of name?
That's a good question. And remember, each name usually has three or four or five different meanings,
Mm,
right?
okay.
Depending on what website you're looking at. So, what you're looking for is the meaning that most resonates with you.
Mhm.
You're not looking for something that's just like, right,
Yeah.
doesn't seem to have anything to do with you. You're looking for the meaning that most resonates with you. And even though you and your mom or your dad have the exact same name, it could be that your dad's functioning in the negative polarity
Mm,
and it's showing you what will happen to you if you follow in dad's footsteps,
okay.
which is another impetus to really start going into a more spiritual direction to overcome your victim consciousness and to become all that you were created to be. In
Mhm.
Christianity, it's understood that all of us, there's a divine plan for all of us, that there is something that we came to the physical plane to do, that we alone can do it, right? But we're not told what that is.
Yeah.
That comes out of our hearts. That comes out of the driving force within us that
Mhm.
we don't even comprehend or understand where that's coming from. Why are you so spiritual when your peers aren't?
Mhm.
Why
Yeah.
are you so knowledgeable about certain things and so incredibly intuitive when your peers seem to be blind and deaf and dumb to all that?
Yeah.
Why is that in there? It has to do with your soul's path.
Mhm.
It has to do with your soul. And that's the beauty of understanding the seven faces of the soul, is that when you begin to look at that, all of a sudden you can understand why all the things that have happened in your life needed to happen.
Yeah.
So, like you said, you're 19 years old, and you're not going to have all the faces haven't yet surfaced,
Yeah.
but many of them have. The first four, at least, have surfaced.
Yeah.
Yes, let's just go back to this thing about the soul, because the soul holds all of your emotions.
Mhm.
You have both a dark aspect and a light aspect. So when you're in victim consciousness, what are the emotions that come up?
Dark, negative, fear, shame, guilt.
Yes, jealousy, envy, rage. I mean, and there are people who stay in victim consciousness all their life, and that's where they're vibrating at constantly.
Mhm.
And then because they're vibrating there, they're attracting more events, people, and experiences to them that take advantage of them, that prove to themselves this is a terrible world. And it's a dangerous world, and it's okay to blame.
Mhm.
Once they begin to understand reality creation and that they're attracting these experiences to them,
Mhm.
they realize that I have to change my vibration. And vibration is dependent on what your emotional energy is.
Yeah.
And the only way that you can change the emotional energy around victim consciousness is realize that I'm creating it all. And therefore, I need to change my attitude. I need to understand that I'm the creator. I'm the one that's attracting this. If I want to attract something different, I have to be different.
Mhm.
And that's why this is such a powerful belief system.
Yeah.
because once you change, literally the whole world changes along with you. And I'm not talking about the world you see on the news or anything like that.
Mhm.
I'm talking about you change all your friends,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
As you upgrade your friends because your old friends are boring,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And you can't change your parents, but you can be more understanding of
Yeah.
your parents,
Yeah. And maybe you can deal with them in a better way.
right?
Maybe you can
Because
even,
they didn't have the opportunity to learn these things.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. Or maybe you
exactly
can
right.
even, I mean, you could even teach your parents some things. Like me and my mom, we talked about, she watches the videos too. And we talked about last class and how she kind of felt like she was in a young adult stage. Um,
Oh, mhm,
so she feels like, she's like, yeah, and maybe in a way you're here to teach me about, being having you're here to teach me about what it means to get to a higher level of maturity with
mhm.
my soul path. So I thought that was interesting.
Yes, and I feel just the same way about my daughter,
Hmm.
that she has been here. I've been learning reality creation since my daughter was like 3 years old, and of course, I've taught her a great deal. I have 3 kids, and
Hmm.
of those 3 kids, Katie and I are. She's 37 now. She and I were like in resonance together all the time that she was growing up, and then in her 20s, she kind of rebelled and went off on her own way. And now that she's in her 30s, we're back in resonance. But there are things that she is so much better at than I am. And she also has a mouth on her. She isn't afraid to talk to me about, when I'm disintegrating in some way or getting negative or whatever. She's the one that puts it in my face.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I feel like, wow, she came in to help me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though I can get really frustrated with her. But and I think if you think of your children like that, um, you won't be so offended when they're telling you the truth.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm very similar to your daughter too. And my mom always tells me, you're kind of harsh. You're kind of the
Mm,
way you're very. I've always gotten this, that I'm very straightforward. I can say things a little harsh.
that's exactly
Yeah.
Katie, right?
Yeah. And sometimes she's a Cancer, and I don't know if you know anything about zodiacs. They're very
Hmm.
sensitive. So she'll get her feelings hurt, and then she'll be like, you know what, like, yeah, you kind of had a point,
Right.
you know. But yeah, yeah,
Right.
I can see the relation.
It takes a very evolved consciousness to be able to admit
Yeah.
that my daughter might know more than I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then, you think, oh, I'm the one that brought her in this world. I have to teach her everything. I am the teacher.
Hmm.
She is the student.
Well,
But
well, it's more than that. It's like you don't sass me.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah, yeah. It's like, don't tell me that it's rebellion almost.
right.
Yeah.
So, anyways, the soul has this aspect to it because it holds all of our emotions. If you're in victim consciousness, it's going to be dark.
Hmm.
If you're in higher consciousness, it's going to be light. So, what I'm teaching in this class is the bridge. How do you go from victim consciousness over to higher consciousness?
Hmm.
Because there's nothing easy about it.
Yeah.
And you can't get over here unless you've got a lot of education first.
Yes.
This class is the education. So, after the name, which comes at your birth, the second phase of the soul is the personality drive. And the personality drive surfaces around the age of 2.
Hmm.
And like every other aspect of the soul's path, it has polarity. The personality drive can disintegrate and go into its least mature aspect, or it can integrate and go into its most mature aspect. So there are 9 personality drives, and the system that Lazarus taught us was called the Enneagram. And there's lots and lots of people who know about the Enneagram. You can find out what your personality drive is by taking certain tests that are available on different websites. And that's called ENNEAGRAM, Enneagram. And next week, I'm going to talk about all 9 personality drives. And this is one of the most important classes that you will have, because once you understand personality drive, you can be, if you're observant, if you're self-observant, if you're mindful, like they talk about in Buddhism, be mindful. If you're mindful, you can see yourself disintegrating
Mhm.
and catch it before it's a disaster.
Yeah.
And then you can also develop strategies to bring yourself up into the higher polarity. The personality drive is chosen for specific reasons, chosen before birth, has nothing to do with your parents, although you can have the same personality drive as a parent,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have to do with the fact that you've inherited that genetically or anything like that. The personality drive is chosen before birth because in its positive polarity, it will help you manifest the most positive polarity of your destiny.
Mhm.
And that's what the soul's path is all about. It's your destiny path. Um, and personality drive drives you down the road of your life.
Mhm.
Think of your life as a journey, right? And your personality drive, you're one of 9 personality drives. So if I had a certain personality drive, it becomes the lens through which I view the world. I'm only viewing the world through the lens of my particular personality drive. But you, on the other hand, could have a totally different personality drive, and you're looking at the world through a completely different lens.
Mhm.
And then we wonder why we don't see anything alike.
Yeah.
It's what makes life so complicated. And I've been a psychotherapist for about 20 years. And when couples would come to me and talk about their conflicts, the first thing I would teach them about is personality drive, because then all of a sudden they can understand, well, we don't have anything in common because I see it this way and they see it that way,
Mhm.
right? And if you can't learn to see things from the other person's point of view, you're never going to get along with anybody.
Mhm.
And also the personality drive, if you're a young soul, your personality drive is going to be pretty disintegrated.
Mhm.
And if you're an older soul and know how to get into higher consciousness, you're going to do what it takes to integrate that personality drive or to move it into its most positive polarity. And so you may not even have anything in common with someone who has the same personality drive as you if they're operating at a less mature level.
Mhm.
You see how complicated it is? It
Yes.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really complicated. And I know for myself, when I was, I learned that most of this information that I'm talking to you about right now was from my teacher, Lazarus, who I studied with for 30 years, took
Mhm.
60, 70, 75 workshops from him over this 30-year period, but the most of the work I did with him were in a 10-year period. And that's when he was teaching us all of this stuff, because he realized that we couldn't really get into higher levels until we healed our traumas,
Mhm.
until we healed our childhood pain, until we were able to separate from victim consciousness and begin the process of evolving into victim consciousness. And so he spent a lot of time teaching us about personality drive,
Mhm.
and that was the single most important thing that helped me understand um, how I was creating a reality that was less than the best.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because then I began to observe myself. It took a while. It wasn't like I could observe it in the beginning, but I was determined. I was focused on my spiritual journey. What do I need to do to evolve? And then I could start to see it. And
Mhm.
then with my daughter, of course, she put it in my face and it like, oh yeah, I'm
Yeah.
doing that thing again.
Mhm.
Because remember, it creates a pathway in the brain that becomes an automatic pathway of least resistance. And we're just doing it
Mhm.
before we even know we're doing it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. So next week, I'm going to talk about my personality drive. You can talk about your personality drive. And we'll also, hopefully, you'll be able to discern the personality drives of anyone that you've been in conflict with, certain parents or partners or just different people in your life. And it's like really, really eye-opening.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that's the second face of the soul. The third face of the soul is called the time of the eternal youth. And the time of the eternal youth comes in late childhood. And it could come as early as 6, but most likely it's more like around 10, 11, 12, 13 years of age. And the time of the eternal youth is represented by usually a few months of feeling really good about your life, that, that everything's going to be all right. Or it can be a time of just a single afternoon. And I find that, I've taught these classes for years, talked to many, many people about their time of the eternal youth, and people that were really abused as children and had, like drug addicted parents and, all of that kind of stuff. And their early lifetime was crazy and they were being sexually abused and all this. Sometimes they can't find the time of the eternal youth, but then if they look, they can find it maybe in one afternoon. And
Mm,
that one afternoon, I felt on top of the world, until the next instance of abuse happened. But for most people who came from normal dysfunctional families, um, it usually was a period of time that lasted for a few months. So examples of the time of eternal youth. So you're thinking about late elementary school, early middle school, or junior high, which is what we called it in my day, in which something special happened that made you feel good. Like you could have been chosen for the lead in a school play. You could have been chosen to sing a song in a school pageant. You could have been chosen to be the leader of a baseball team or football team or something like that. Um, you could have, I've had several people say, oh, I know when it was for me. It was that magical summer between late childhood and early adolescence was when I was allowed to ride my bike with my friends all over town. I didn't have any parents keeping me under surveillance,
mhm,
right? And I just felt like I'd figured it all out, you
mm,
know? Like I was able to go to a restaurant with a friend and I had my own money to pay and right,
mm,
you're just feeling like I'm on top of the world here.
yeah.
And for me, my time of the eternal youth was I was really good at sports and track. I was in a track meet, and I
Mm,
think I was about 12 years old, and I won all these blue ribbons. And
mm,
there was a school assembly, and I was called up in front of the school and made much of, for 5 minutes. But um, that gave me that feeling of invincibility.
mm,
Like, I'm going to figure this out. And of course, the time of the childhood in general is a time of innocence, right? We're not really aware of all the bad things there are that are in the world that we're going to have to face later on.
mm,
So this is coming, the time of the eternal youth is coming at the tail end of that period of your life. And it's a time where you have rose colored glasses on
mm.
and you don't know, you don't have a bigger picture yet. So, Yvette, what was your time of the eternal youth?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I was trying to think about a potential moment that in my life that I can think of. Um, I've had a few. I mean, there's a few that came across my mind. Um, maybe when I remember when I was in, I think middle school. I was maybe in like sixth grade. No, maybe like between fourth and sixth grade, maybe. Um, there was one time where I went to snow camp, and it was I went to a field trip. Oh, but then oh my god, I'm like trying to think. So there's one time I went to snow camp, and that was like without my parents there, and it was like this church thing. But I remember there was like a bridge between like the girls and the boys dorms and the church. And at night I remember we weren't allowed to, but we all snuck out of the dorms and we like had like a party on the bridge, and we like played music, and then we were all talking. I think me and my friends were like in our onesies, and there's that moment. Or there was a moment probably like when I would play, I don't know if you know the game Foursquare.
Mhm.
We would play that, and I remember I was like really good, and it was like really fun to play because they were like kids would like line up and everybody would like play it, and
Mhm.
like the best one would just stay at that square and
Right.
beat
Uh-huh.
all the other. And I remember there's like one time where I did that, and
Mhm.
like, really
And
cool.
did it and what were the feelings that you had at that time?
Like you said, like you don't see a bigger, you just see that moment. Like you're very in the moment.
Mm.
Like
Mhm.
when you're feeling that type. I mean, there's other moments too in my life that I felt like that
Mhm.
too when I was younger and in that state.
Mhm.
But you kind of just feel like, yeah, like this is like you kind of want to feel like that forever. And in
Right.
that moment, you
Uh-huh.
think you will.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
And you're feeling really successful and like,
yeah,
do it,
yeah.
bring it on.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when you're in a bad moment, you're like, "Why can't I feel like how I felt when I won at Foursquare?" Like,
Right. Uh-huh.
yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. So everybody's time of the eternal youth is a little bit different, but it's exactly that. It's this feeling that I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to make it in life. And you've got those rose-colored glasses on from youth and you just have no idea what's coming.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because what's coming is your adolescence.
Yeah.
And adolescence is really a turbulent time for most kids. I mean, for one thing, adolescents are mean to each other.
Mhm.
They pick on each other, they call each other's names, they take you down, and it's the time when you're become very observant and you're comparing yourself to everybody else and you're finding that you're shorter, you just don't have what it takes.
Mhm.
And you have to look a certain way, you have to be a certain size. It's like you have to be Cinderella with the small feet to fit
Yeah.
in that shoe, and nobody fits.
Mhm.
And then there are mean kids. I know there was really mean kids in my high school. Even in middle school, they just pick on certain people and make them feel terrible.
Mhm.
And that's just seems to be the universal way it is.
Yeah.
And that's when it happens. So the fourth face of the soul is called the wounding.
Mm.
And the wounding is the single most tragic event of your young life. Doesn't mean you don't have tragic events later on, but
Mhm.
it's the single most tragic event of your young life. And at that moment, the moment of the wounding, your entire life changes.
Mm.
You are not the same person anymore. And so for some people, this can be a huge event that anyone would say, yes, that's tragic. It can be the death of a parent or a sibling, the divorce of parents. It can be the you suddenly get a disease, or you have an accident that makes you crippled or defaces you in some way. Um, it could be uh, well, anyway, you get what I mean. You get raped, you could start uh, going out with boys and suddenly you're being date raped. A lot of girls I've talked to, that was their wounding,
Mhm.
because it happens to a lot of young women. Um, in adolescence, you don't trust your parents anymore. You don't trust your teachers or even your ministers. You go through a time when you think you know everything. You're learning everything from the media about how to be a young woman or a young man, how to be sexually and so forth and so on. So you're being bombarded with all of these messages that are completely false, but you're a teenager, you don't know.
Yeah.
And you're in competition and comparison.
Mhm.
Like, oh, all my friends are having sex. I better find somebody to do it with.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's what's expected of me as a female. I'm nothing.
Mm.
Or if you're a boy and you're not having sex and all your friends are, it's like, oh my God, it's the end of the world.
Mhm.
And so then we wound each other
Yeah.
because now, I thought I had a boyfriend, but they had sex with my best friend. And,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
these are the kinds of things that begin to happen. And so you could have been one of those events, Or you could have had numerous small events until you get to the straw that breaks the camel's back. So you're going along, you've been in the time of the eternal youth, you're going along, those rose colored glasses are being taken off a little bit at a time. You're having numerous events where things are going wrong. You're having difficulty in class, or somebody's starting to pick on you, and you're strong for a while, and then all of a sudden you get to the straw that breaks the camel's back. And even though that straw was relatively insignificant, it's what produces the wounding.
Mhm.
Another way the wounding can happen is it is a personal event that other people can look at and say, well, that's no big deal.
Mhm.
But for you, it's tragic.
Yeah.
So, what happens when you're wounded during this specific time? You could have had woundings before, you'll have definitely have woundings afterwards. But it's this specific event that takes place sometime in adolescence between, say, ages of 12 and I've heard some people 21, 22, the wounding didn't come until early 20s. So during this time, you're going to have this specific event. And Lazar says that this is the time you cut the umbilical cord to your soul.
Mm.
And suddenly you no longer have that automatic guidance system. You no longer have that that feeling of being nurtured
Mhm.
by your soul.
Yeah.
And so in order to help you understand that, I'm going to tell you what my wounding was, because my wounding was one of those that to other people it wouldn't seem like it would have been that big a deal. But to me, it wrecked my life for
Mhm.
years. And you'll understand that as I go through this class. And then, Yvette, I'm going to ask you what your wounding was. I assume you've had one, you're 19,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And then we can, you don't have to share if you feel too vulnerable, but I find in my classes that the more vulnerable people can be, the more vulnerable they allow other people to be. So it's very important to be able to tell yourself the truth
Mhm.
about these kinds of experiences.
Yes.
So when I was in high school, actually all my young life, I was kind of a goody two shoes. I followed the rules. I went to school every day. I did my homework. I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I was very shy and kind of emotionally repressed. I didn't share much with other people, and I didn't have very many friends. And I was kind of a leader in the sense that I wasn't interested in drugs and alcohol. I went to school during the 60s. And if you know anything about the 60s, I graduated high school in 1970. And during those years, those high school years, the sexual revolution happened, the drug revolution happened, all these things that until that time, it turned the whole world upside down.
Mhm.
Everyone else was just, kind of normally going along. And
Yeah.
then that happened. And when you're a teenager and the sexual revolutions happen, you're doing a lot of dumb things. Like you're just smoking marijuana all day long, and you're starting to take all these drugs, and you start doing sexual behaviors that before that time women would never have done.
Mhm.
Boys maybe, but not women,
Yeah.
right? That just wasn't done. And so I saw this all going on, and I didn't have a big world view or anything like that. I didn't know what was going on. My parents never talked about me about anything very significant. I didn't have a religion, so I had no minister to, I wasn't going to church or anything like that where they spend more time talking to you about developing your character. I wasn't receiving any of that. But I saw all my peers doing this, what I think of as really kind of crazy behavior. And I just wasn't interested in it. So that just made me more repressed, more going inside myself.
Mhm.
And I went to a high school, and popular kids would just pick on kids that were like slightly funny looking, or something was kind of odd about them, and they would be relentless.
Mm.
You had that in your school, right?
Yeah.
I don't know of anyone who doesn't have that experience. And I'm the type that I just hated that.
Mhm.
That was really, really disturbing to me. So I would befriend these people.
Mhm.
Not that I related to them, because I just I've always been like really self-directed
Mhm.
and not getting caught up in fads or any of those things.
Yeah.
And so there was this girl in my, I think I was a senior in high school, that was being picked on by the cheerleader crowd.
Mm.
And I decided to befriend her. And she had transferred in from another school from New York. I lived in Southern California at the time. She had a bit of a Brooklyn accent, which sounds really funny to somebody who's grown up in California. And that's one of the things she was being picked on for. And I thought, this is ridiculous. And so I befriended her because she didn't have any other friends. She was new at the school.
Mhm.
And on this particular day of my wounding, I had been talking to her about the fact that I was rarely absent from school, and she was absent a lot. I didn't know why she was absent, but I was kind of being, in my goody two shoes way, I was kind of being a role model and saying, "Well, I'm never absent from school, and I got good grades and all of that kind of stuff." And um, that particular day, I had my mother's car, and it was election day. And in those days, so I'm 70 years old, so we're talking about 40 some years ago, the polling place was in different people's houses.
Mm.
And so my mom always had the polling place at our house, and she was part of the gr- team of people who were there to, um, you know, be there while people voted. And then the people who were there would get together and count all the votes.
Mhm.
And so, because she couldn't go anywhere that day, she said I could take the car to school. So I took the car to school. I asked this friend if she wanted a ride home. I gave her a ride home. And then on the way back to my house, I got in a car accident.
Mhm.
Now, that in itself could be the wounding, but that wasn't my wounding. But here I am, this very shy, repressed girl. I have this, it's a minor car accident. And what happened was my mom's car didn't have any brake fluid. And so there was a car that was stopped at a light in front of me, and I put on the brakes, and it felt like my car went faster
Ooh.
and ran into the car in front of me. And it wasn't so bad that I couldn't pull off the road and everything, but I was all shook up.
Mhm.
And I knew my mom couldn't get me because, well, I had the car, right?
Yeah.
And so I called a friend's mom, and I was humiliated by the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I called a friend's mom. She took me home. She dropped me off at my house, and I walked in, and there's all these strangers in my house. And to understand the wounding, I have to tell you about my relationship with my mom at that time. And my mom was not a nurturing person. She was very emotionally abusive to me all my childhood. I mean, she was emotionally abusive to me till my dad died 5 years ago.
Mhm.
And so, needless to say, we didn't have a good relationship. And I wasn't used to sharing anything with my mom. And when she would emotionally abuse me, I dealt with that by shutting down, retreating, and showing no emotion.
Mhm.
'Cause I didn't want her to know how hurtful she was to me.
Mhm.
And so I go in the house with all these strangers, and my mom says, "Where's the car?"
Mm.
And I said, "Well, I wrecked the car
Yeah.
right in front of all these strangers, which was utterly humiliating to me. Still not the wounding. And, um, I told my mom what happened, and I kind of started to cry. And she put her arms around me. And my mom was not a nurturing woman. She did this attempt to nurture me by putting her arms around me. But by that time, I couldn't stand my mom.
Mm.
I just had no relationship with her. I did not want her touching me. That's the intensity of the the darker feelings that I had towards my mom. Anyway, she took me into the bedroom, and she brought in a little tranquilizer or something, a little pill, and wanted me to take it just to calm me down. And I had an inner voice in my head, probably the voice of my soul. I was seeing all my peers taking drugs and doing all these crazy things, that voice had always said, "You better not take drugs."
Mm.
And so when she gave me that pill, I took it, and at that moment, I betrayed
Mm.
that voice. Now
Mm.
the wounding's starting.
Yeah.
because I betrayed the voice of my soul. And I wasn't conscious that this was the voice of my soul. I figured all this out years and years later. But I had a very active relationship with the voice of my soul, um, all during my childhood. But I betrayed that voice. The next day, I stayed home from school. And the following day, I went back to school. I mean, there was no reason for me to stay home from school other than I was emotionally shook
Mhm.
up. I wasn't injured in any way. And when I got together with my friend, we had a class together, and she says, "What happened to you?
Mhm.
You told me you were never absent from school." And I lied, and I
Mm.
said I was sick. And I was the type of person, also the voice of my soul, you don't tell lies.
Mm.
That was the wounding. And when I told myself that lie, now, even though I had never told myself this consciously, I said to myself, I can never be a healer because I tell lies.
Mm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the it's when the umbilical cord to your soul gets cut.
Mm. Yeah.
And once you go through that wounding, you don't think that you can be the person you really are. So
Mhm.
in childhood, you're just yourself, right? If you want to throw a tantrum in the grocery store when you're two, you just do it. You
Mhm.
don't think anything bad about yourself or anything. But all through our childhood and into adolescence, you're learning there's socially acceptable behavior and not socially acceptable behavior, right?
Yeah.
Well, at that point, when the wounding actually happened, I told myself I can never be a healer, and a healer is who I am,
Mhm.
right? So later on in life, I eventually became an elementary school teacher, teaching little children how to read and write. But at the tail end of that period of my life, I'd also started reading the Course in Miracles, and then I started putting all these spiritual principles, not religious, but spiritual principles into the classroom and teaching my children, you are powerful people.
Mhm.
You have the power of decision. And what kind of decisions are you going to make with that power that you have? And I would put all these, it was like I only was teaching a kindergarten and first grade at that time, but it was like those kids loved me. And I was really uplifting those children.
Mhm.
So then later on, I retrained to become a psychotherapist. I've been doing that for the last 20 years. And when I began working with Lazarus, well, I went through my awakening to God in 1987 when I was 38. And then 4 years later, I began the Course in Miracles, and then 4 years later began to work with Lazarus. And the first 10 years of working with Lazarus was a spiritual psychology. It was all about this is how you heal yourself.
Mhm.
It took me 10 years to figure all this out,
Yeah.
right? And then immediately after I um, uh, had begun that process of healing myself, I began teaching these classes in my living room.
Mm.
So I'm a healer,
Yeah.
right? Spiritual healer, emotional healer, psychological healer, and I'm also really interested in how to heal the body. I watch all these health summits and anything related to healing any part of the body. That's what I'm interested in. It's not necessarily how I've always made a living, but
Mhm.
that's who I am.
Mhm.
So to tell myself I can never be a healer because I tell lies, that was devastating.
Yeah.
So that was my wounding. Mm.
Mm.
So have you thought what might be your wounding?
Yeah, yes. I never had a problem. I always lied. I mean, I lied if I need to. I think that, lying is necessary in some cases. And
Hmm.
I've also done drugs and I didn't feel bad for it. So
Hmm.
that's
So you
completely.
didn't have that voice that I had.
No, no, I didn't. I was like, well, you know what? I'll try anything once type thing.
Hmm.
And if I don't like it, whatever. I was kind of like you in the way where I didn't really care about trends. I didn't really care to fit in. I knew I was a little weird. That's okay.
Hmm.
I didn't really have a lot of friends. Um, I kind of lost all my friends due to either me not resonating with them, they not resonating with me, or something stupid that wasn't a big deal. So
Hmm.
I sat alone a lot at lunch. You know like, I guess some people said I look unapproachable, so people didn't really come up to me and try to be my friend, because
Mhm.
I look, especially, like, I know that I'm attractive, and usually attractive people have friends, so
Mhm.
they kinda were like, "What's going on here?" Like,
Mhm.
"Okay, let me just leave her alone, maybe something's wrong with her." I don't know.
Mhm.
So that wasn't my problem. I think my wounding happened, um, with my relationships with other people, especially, like, my romantic relationships.
Mhm.
Um, I think my first relationship, it was like 8th grade. It lasted like a couple months. It was not even a real relationship at that point.
Mhm.
We just, oh, I like him, he likes me,
Mhm.
great. And then he broke up with me, and I remember I would like cry all the time. And now I think it's so dumb. It's like
Mhm.
I didn't even, we didn't even have a connection. Like,
Right.
I didn't have sex with him, or anything like
Mhm.
that. I was very young, but I remember that hurt me a lot. And then it wasn't until I got into my first actual relationship, I believe I was 15 and I was a sophomore in high school. And that lasted for 5 months, I think. And even though it wasn't that long of a period, it felt very intense just because it was the first guy that I brought to meet my parents. I got along really well with his family. We both were the same race, so that I kind of fit in right away,
Mhm.
and it felt right. And
Mhm.
um, and then when he broke up with me, I was just devastated, and
Mhm.
it caused me to have bad relationships moving forward because I was kind of so desperate for um kind of like validation. I was so desperate for somebody to just hold me and tell me it's okay. I
Mhm.
would go out with guys that were potentially either dangerous or they did not have my best interest. Or,
Mhm.
it wasn't a solid, stable relationship.
Mhm.
And or then I would smoke more. I would just try to numb myself out, and that was my wounding. It was the breakup that caused me, I think, to basically lead towards the wounding.
Mhm.
And after that, it caused me to get in this one really bad relationship that it caused a lot of trust issues for myself. I think that trust issues don't really come from you not being able to trust other people. It comes from you not trusting yourself.
Right. Mhm.
And I didn't trust myself at all because I thought, oh, if I can get in that relationship, and I thought that was okay, and I was in it for so long, how can I get in another relationship and know that it's okay? Because I didn't know that was not okay until years later, a year later.
Right.
So that, I think, was my wounding. It was the aftermath of that breakup.
Mhm. And so you were basically telling yourself you can't trust yourself.
That um and it was just the fact that I just needed, because I didn't have a lot of friends. So I was like, oh, if I don't have at least
Right.
somebody, I need something
Mhm.
you know, to be there for me. And it made me kind of lack self-love also, because
Mhm.
put other people, I would put, especially like my partner or whatever, above myself.
Mhm.
And that was also really bad. And now that I'm pretty much, I'm still healing from it, but I'm a lot better than what I was a year ago.
Mhm.
And I've just kind of shifted my perspective on, I trust myself now. I got in a relationship after that I was very self-reflective, and I knew, like, okay, like, I think this is time to end it, and it was fine, and I felt good from it. Um, and then I kind of started being able to trust myself again.
Mhm. What you're bringing up is a really common theme for a lot of girls and boys too. They have woundings around their first love relationship. Those can be really devastating experiences that
Yeah.
can change your life forever.
Yeah. And then you start, it's not even about the breakup in the relationship, it's what comes after. It's like your ability to be in a relationship after that. Um,
Yes.
and also you just start doing dumb things. You can start having sex with all these people because you feel like you're lacking physical connection. Or you can do drugs to numb yourself out, to stop
Yes.
thinking about that person. And then when you're sober, you think about it again. And
Yes.
addiction, you could get an addiction from a 5 month relationship, and
Right.
it's like a domino effect that just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until you
Yes.
heal and you're like, okay, I gotta stop doing that. That's
Yes.
stupid.
Yes.
um,
Well, what you're talking about is the sixth space of the soul,
mhm,
and the sixth space of the soul is what's called the shadow time. And
mhm.
that's it. And shadow time is exactly what you're saying. And
Yeah.
it comes directly on the heels of the wounding. For one thing, remember that we talked about the dark law in
Mhm,
that second class, how we all have this dark law that becomes a path of least resistance in the brain. I'm no good. I'll never be happy. No one will ever love me. I'll never get what I want. I'll always be a failure, right? Everybody has those dark laws. And guess when they start?
mhm.
Right after the wounding,
Yeah.
right? And then we say them over and over and over again because that law makes our world make sense.
Mm. Is the wounding the fourth or the fifth phase?
So the wounding, so there's the name, the personality drive, the time of the eternal youth, the wounding,
Hmm.
four.
Okay.
Fifth phase is the shadow.
Okay.
The shadow time lasts from the wounding.
Hmm.
It could go on to the end of your life if you never develop do any spiritual growth whatsoever. Lots of people don't.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the time. It's just like you said, that's when you start your addictions.
Hmm.
That's when you start risky behaviors. That's when you don't trust yourself anymore or anybody else. That's you're getting back at the people of the world because of something that was done to you,
Hmm.
right? And so um, that's also the time when you start what's called the dark shield of shame, undeservingness, and guilt, leading to self-sabotage, self-punishment, and the denial of love. So this is what happens. In childhood, we start developing shame. We're not conscious of it until years later, but I mean, actually, you may never become conscious of it if you're not self-reflective. But we start developing shame. Mom and dad are saying, "Don't do this, don't do that, don't hit your brother, don't do this and that." And well, when you're a child, you have no impulse control, so you do it anyway.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And eventually you start hearing things. Your parents may start calling you names. They might start saying, "What's wrong with you?" Why are you being so stupid? Why are you XYZ? Why don't you do as good in school as your brother? Whatever. And you start developing this thing called shame. And in childhood, it develops as shame leading to undeservingness. So
Mm.
that this becomes a law in your mind. I don't deserve that puppy because I'm a bad boy or bad girl. It's not because mom and dad don't want to take care of it and shovel all the poop and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But remember, you don't see a bigger picture in childhood.
Hmm.
You only see the little picture, and it's always revolves around you.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's the way they bring order to this chaotic reality where they don't understand why things are happening. So shame and undeservingness, and now I feel guilty because I keep doing that thing. Children have no impulse control, so or very little anyway. Some
Yeah.
have none,
Yeah.
and they keep doing those same naughty things.
Hmm.
Now I'm feeling guilty. And what does guilt lead to? Hey, what do we tell a criminal when they're guilty?
You're gonna go away forever.
You're gonna be punished. You're gonna go to
Yeah.
jail,
Hmm.
right? Well, and there are parents who still spank their kids and hit their kids and punish their kids, right? So that's like a complex that all comes together in childhood. But as I said, children don't tend to be self-reflective, so they're not like noticing these. I'm feeling this way, and then we go into adolescence. And during the time of the wounding, we got shame, undeservedness, and guilt leading to self sabotage,
Hmm.
right? We're sabotaging ourselves. We're taking drugs. We're doing risky behaviors. We're, cutting ourselves, burning all these crazy things, anorexia, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, self self sabotage, self punishment, right? And when you're going to parties and getting drunk all the time, you might get in a car accident when you come home or have sex with somebody and all of a sudden you're pregnant and,
Hmm.
self punishment. Ah, I got a hangover, now I have to, my parents found out and I'm grounded for 20 years, this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And the denial of love,
Mhm.
right? I mean, we're here to experience God's love, but
Yeah.
you're not experiencing it when you're in the time of the shadow. You can't experience it, and you're creating that,
Mhm.
right? And here's the thing, we get into these addictions, right? Maybe it's drugs and alcohol, maybe it's gambling, maybe it's video games, maybe it's food addictions, sugar addictions, or whatever.
Mhm.
So you start on your addiction, and an addiction means that you do it over and over.
Mhm.
Because why? Because it's numbing the pain. All addictions numb the pain of shame.
Yeah.
So you do your addiction, you deny yourself, punish yourself with your addiction,
Mhm.
and deny yourself love because of that addiction. And then you decide, well, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is bad for me. Right? How many people that know they need to stop drinking, but they can't because
Mhm.
they have no other coping strategy. And so they do it again. Same thing happens, bad things happen. And now what do? You're back in the same cycle again.
Mhm.
I'm bad. I'm no good. I can never do it right. I'm stupid. Shame, undeservingness, guilt, self sabotage, self punishment, denial of love. It's an endless, vicious circle
Mhm.
creating your reality. No one's doing it but you. And it's because of how this brain now has been wired with all these negative limiting beliefs.
Mhm.
And Lazarus says that, in ancient times, people knew about the soul's path, they knew about the wounding. And if you went through a wounding, then you could go to a healer of that day and receive healing, help the people, the shaman or the priestess or whoever knew about this and they could help you get over this. But now nobody does that. Now if you're an adolescent and you're depressed and anxious, which I don't know why any adolescent wouldn't be depressed and anxious in this day and age. Um, well, here, take this drug, take
Mhm.
Xanax, take, whatever, it's like, don't ever figure it out. Don't ever develop any kind of coping strategy. Don't try to understand yourself. Don't forgive yourself.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
take a drug, then
Yeah.
it'll go away.
Mhm.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Never works. You never develop any kind of coping strategy. Pharmaceutical drugs, I put them in the same category as alcohol and recreational drugs
Yeah. Yeah.
because they do exactly the same thing. You
Yeah.
never have to
Relying.
deal with what's going on up here.
Mhm. Yeah, because you end up relying on that drug to make you feel better, and then it's like, well, what happens if it goes away one day? Or what happens if you can't take it that day, and then,
Hmm.
you could start
Hmm.
getting very violent or angry or
Hmm.
really depressed or because you don't have that drug anymore.
Right. Because you don't have any kind of emotional or spiritual coping strategy. So,
Mhm.
as I began to heal, I began to understand I'm doing the best I can with the consciousness I've got. If
Mhm.
I could do better, I would do better. That's the coping strategy. This too shall pass is another one of my coping strategies. Everybody makes mistakes. And you know what? Even though I made mistakes, I'm still completely lovable. That's a huge coping strategy
Mhm.
of mind because humans are mistake making people. That's how we learn.
Yeah.
We never learn by example. It'd be nice if we could, learn by
Yeah.
somebody else's example, but we don't seem to be able to do that. It's like you said, well, you said to me, well, I just wanted to have experience. I wanted to have that experience of
Mhm.
taking drugs. I wanted to have that experience. It's like, okay, try it out and see how you like it.
Yeah. And then, the goal is to grow out of it.
Right.
The goal is, like with me, I experienced it once, and especially nowadays, like everyone smokes weed or
Hmm.
everyone has taken pills, everyone is drinking
Well,
alcohol.
and 80% of the male population is into porn.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another massive addiction.
Addiction, yeah. Yeah, and it like, for me, for example, is, like, all my friends would smoke weed whenever we would hang out, so I'm like,
Mhm.
"Okay," like, it was I mean, I would always say, "Oh, well, I wanna do it because I wanna do it," but in a way, I mean, I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't around those type of people. So, as a result, I would do it all the time. I would have a panic attack, and then I would get mad at myself because I can't handle it and they can. And
Right.
I'd be like, "Why am I no, like, I'm fine, like, I just need to keep doing it, and then eventually it'll
Mhm.
get better." And it never gets better.
Right.
Um,
And
sometimes
you're all the time you're saying, "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with
yeah,
me?"
yeah, and, eventually I'm like, "This is stupid," like, I and then I remember I would hang out with somebody, and I'd be like, "Oh, like, I don't smoke," and then for some people, that'd be the last time I hang out with them, and it's like they
Right.
just want somebody to get high with, and I'm like, "You know what? I don't want those type of people around me."
Right. And
And
then life gets lonely.
yeah, because then all of a sudden you don't have any friends because you don't
Right.
smoke
Mhm.
or you don't take drugs.
Mhm.
So,
But, God will always be your best friend,
yeah,
but people don't even know that God is there, really.
yeah, yeah. Or I mean, for me at least, the idea of the concept of God that was taught to me in a Christian church, I felt bad because I didn't want that type of God around me. It felt like a nagging parent almost.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
was like, I don't think I want, and then I felt bad. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I don't love God. Like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I'm gonna go to hell. Like, okay, I
Mhm.
don't Satan
Well,
either, but
right.
like,
Yeah, well, that God, unfortunately, is taught that it's an all-loving God that'll cast you into hell if you do bad things.
yeah,
Instead of an understanding God that understands you're doing the best that you can with the maturity level you've got. If you could do better, you would do better.
yeah,
And God loves all his children and he understands that we're trying to grow up.
yeah. And Earth, I mean, the human experience is suffering itself. Like that's
Mhm.
suffering enough, hell or not. I mean, I think this experience can be hell if you make it hell.
Yes.
Yeah. Like it could be heaven or hell depending on how you perceive it and what you
Hmm.
create.
Right, exactly. And, unfortunately, you can be born to very abusive parents, but that's all related to issues from other lifetimes that we've talked about before.
Hmm.
Feeling like you need to be punished or, you have unfinished business from the past that you need to work out with these people or, so many different things that can cause you to incarnate to those parents. You could be courted to them,
Yeah.
so many different things, but people don't want to think that you create your reality from that level.
Yeah.
They want to be able to blame their parents.
Yeah.
And, when you incarnate to bad parents, well, your life is hell.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it becomes very, very difficult to outgrow that kind of experience because, like, those formative years, you're laying down all those neural pathways in the brain. You're
Hmm.
seeing life through a child's eyes, and you're formulating a worldview based upon that child's perception of life.
Hmm.
And once you've created that neural net, that's the way you see the world. It doesn't matter how old you become.
Hmm.
That's the way you see the world.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important in this journey to begin the process of consciously rewiring your brain with the beliefs that your parents should have been giving you in the first place.
Hmm.
But they couldn't because they weren't given those beliefs.
Yeah. And when you're a kid, like at least for me, I thought that, oh, my parents' way of thinking is the right way or is the only
Right.
way. And,
Hmm.
and as I kind of got older, I realized my parents are unhealed as much as anyone else. My parents have their own traumas that they never got over and they never knew
Hmm.
how to heal themselves. And as a result, they put that on me unconsciously. And now I have to figure out what if they're just projecting their unhealed traumas on me or if they doing it out of fear or they're doing it out of love. I have to navigate their
Right.
their
Their
kind of
psyche.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
it's hard.
Well, yeah, especially when you don't know much yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm just figuring this out, and I'm like, okay, like, and then you have to separate. They could be doing like really mean things to you, or they could say really mean things, but it's more of them just projecting their sadness or their unhealed parts of themselves onto you, and it's hard
Hmm.
not to take that personally because you're their kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's practically impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and they could be just passing on their parents' parenting
Mhm.
style
Yeah.
to you, and that's the problem of not being self-reflective.
Mhm. Yeah.
We live in a reality. Everything out here is a reflection of everything in here.
Mhm.
But if you're not reflecting upon the reflection,
Mhm.
you don't know it has anything to do with you.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So how does humanity ever improve?
It's extremely difficult.
Yeah, and that's why it takes thousands of lifetimes to evolve.
Yeah. And nowadays, feel like they made it harder. I mean, I feel like it's easier now that we have like Google or YouTube or
Hmm.
stuff like that. We have more resources, but compared to what you're talking about, like thousands of years ago in ancient times, where this was all just basic knowledge, like
Hmm.
now it's so much harder.
Yeah, because people don't have the knowledge.
No, yeah, it's been all put away or told that it was nonsense or whatever.
Hmm. Right. And, I was extremely lucky to have found number one, the Course in Miracles, which gave me a basic understanding of God and said a thousand times over in that book, God loves you, God loves you, God loves you. You have no idea how much you are loved.
Hmm.
And because I had come from, I had a very abusive mom, emotionally abusive mom, that meant so much to me
Hmm.
to know that there was something or someone that loved me,
Hmm.
right? But then I had the um, the privilege to work with Lazarus,
Hmm.
who's a channel being, never been physical, who has, he's kind of like God. He lives in this multi-dimensional reality and knows everything simultaneously. And this was, he said, he has a life's purpose too. People at times get to question Lazarus about who he is and why is he doing what he did. And he says, well, this is my life's purpose. This is my ability to go to not only the earth, but different planets that are struggling and channel in and teach them.
Hmm.
This is how you evolve.
Yeah.
These are the things you have to do. And then, I worked with Lazarus for 30 years, and now that's the gift that I have to give because I had to spend a long time figuring out
Hmm.
all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so this is how we change the world. And
Hmm.
you and I are part of this change. I'm teaching you. You're a young person. You're going to go on and teach so many more people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the most important information humanity needs to have at
Hmm.
this time of transition.
Yeah.
So anyway, the shadow time is a dark time. It's the time when you're judging yourself, you're judging other people, you're criticizing yourself, you're criticizing other people, you're blaming yourself, you're blaming other people. Most people develop the worldview that we live in a dangerous world, that people can't be trusted, that you have to keep your, self closed off, because otherwise you'll get hurt. All of these things prevent us from taking responsibility for our lives and actually evolving into a higher way of being in the world. And I was right there with all those things. I was 38 years old, way older than you.
Hmm.
Um, very much, very deeply into victim consciousness, very, very deeply into being shame based and thinking there's something wrong with me. And, that,
Yeah.
and it was tragic. My life, I was depressed. I had anxiety. Well, no wonder. Of
Hmm.
course, you're going to be depressed and have anxiety when that's your worldview.
Hmm.
We don't need drugs to get over it. That doesn't help.
Yeah.
We need these understandings, and we need to work with somebody who is understanding to get through these things and develop coping strategies.
Hmm.
So, as I said, the shadow time lasts from the time of wounding. If you don't get on a spiritual journey after that, you could be in the shadow doing dark and self destructive things to self and others until you die,
Hmm.
which you see it happening out in the world all the time. So, the sixth face of the soul is what Lazarus calls the time of the double. And this happens in midlife. So a lot of people will call it a midlife crisis. So you're going along, you're doing the best you can, struggling with addictions or struggling with whatever. And then something happens sometime in your between 40 and say 55. Something happens, your business fails, suddenly you're bankrupt, or you get some kind of fatal disease, or your wife or child gets some kind of fatal disease, or you're not, you're, what's another one? Your teenager who you were proud of as a kid, and then all of a sudden they're doing all these wild and crazy things you don't know how to handle,
Yeah.
right? Something comes along that's big, that rocks your whole world. And you make a decision at that time in your life. If you're developing spiritually, you may make a decision to become wise, to become philosophical about this event and become wise. What can I learn from this event so I don't make these mistakes again, right? That's conscious evolution. Because we only learn from our mistakes, right?
Yeah.
People aren't motivated to learn when everything's hunky dory. We learn when we're on our knees.
Mm.
We either get it together or it kills us.
Mhm.
And so I like to use the movie American Beauty to help people understand the time of the devil. So did you ever see that movie called American Beauty?
No.
It's I don't know, 20 years older. So, maybe before you were born, I'm not sure. But it was a very popular movie for a while. And in this movie, you got a couple that are kind of upwardly mobile, and they're proud of their business. They have their house is, it's all about money, looking good, having the right furniture, and so forth and so on. And they're planning on, how to create even having even more money. And then suddenly their business fails.
Mm.
And so there's two main characters, the husband and the wife. And the wife decides to find a new boyfriend. They have a teenage daughter.
Mm.
The wife decides to find a new boyfriend. That's how I'm going to deal with this pain that I'm experiencing right now. It's a distraction from the pain. And then the husband decides to stop caring about anything much. He's going to buy a fast sports car and work at McDonald's and smoke marijuana, because that was the happiest time of his life, was when he was an adolescent. He was smoking marijuana all the time and didn't have any responsibilities. And this type of thing is exactly what happens during the time of the devil. It will be the time that the guy, frequently the guy, could be the girl, well, I'm going to drop this wrinkled old wife that I have that has had, 3 children or whatever, and no longer has the figure she had when she was younger. I'm going to get rid of her, buy a fancy sports car, and get a young, beautiful wife. And so they have a teenage daughter, and the teenage daughter, it's been a long time since I watched this movie, but she's either a cheerleader or she's best friends with a cheerleader. The best friend, is beautiful and makes overtures to her best friend's father,
Mm.
sexual overtures, because of all the wrong messages she's received from the media and what it means to be a female. And you can just see once you understand all this, you can just see where all this is coming from.
Mhm.
And so he has the opportunity to have sex with her. So she's like 17, 18 years old. He's got a teenage daughter, so he's in his 40, 45, something like that. And he finally figures it out. It's like, this isn't right.
Mm.
And at that point, he chooses to become wise. Until then, he was just going down, disintegrating along that negative path. And Lazar says that you will choose to either recapture your youth or become wise, to learn from this experience and go on from there to become a better person. Because every time we learn from an experience, we become wiser.
Mm-hmm.
So if you choose to recapture your youth, Lazar says it can take you all the way back to Alzheimer's disease and dementia.
Mm-hmm.
You're recapturing the youngest time. So an example would be if you get cancer, say that is your wounding, and it's pretty much understood now by every alternative medical doctor that is not just in the matrix, but has actually done research on their own, that sugar and bad food, they may not cause cancer, but boy, they have a lot to do with getting cancer. If you're going to recapture your youth, you're going to say, okay, doctor, you can pump me full of toxic chemicals in the hopes that this cancer shrinks. And I'll just go on eating all the bad food I've always eaten. And that's going to take you right into death because you're not choosing to learn from this experience. You know, if I got a diagnosis of cancer, I mean, I spend hours and hours looking at health videos and taking health summits, so I know a lot of things. But if I knew nothing, I'd be on YouTube. I'd be looking up on YouTube. I'd put in people who have healed themselves of cancer
Mm-hmm.
and looking at all the stories, naturally healing cancer. I would be wanting to get as knowledgeable as I could
Mm-hmm.
about what could have caused this.
Yeah.
I wouldn't just be believing a doctor who's going to make billions of dollars off of me by
Yeah.
pumping me through full of toxic chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't even make sense to me.
Yeah.
But how many people actually do that?
A lot. Most.
Well, how many people actually do YouTube and look up the research and spend time figuring this thing out? Most don't, right? They just do what the doctor tells them and think that it's hope for the best.
Mm-hmm.
But they haven't learned a thing about themselves, about what's going on in the world, about how our food supply is toxic. They haven't learned a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the soul's path is designed to evolve us. But you don't have to evolve. That's a decision that you make.
Mm-hmm.
You make a decision to become wise. You make a decision to learn from your mistakes. You make a decision not to be in victim consciousness anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't even know you have a choice, you don't make that decision.
Yeah.
Can you see the problem that's occurring in our world right now?
Mm-hmm.
It's all based on lack of knowledge.
Yeah. And it's not mainstream. The
It's
knowledge
not
about
right. And we're being unbelievably censored. So all the good stuff is, you can't even find it anymore.
it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because why? The powers that be don't want us to know this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It would rock their world
Yeah.
and wreck them financially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's talk about the last face of the soul, the seventh face, and that is called the remain.
Mm-hmm.
The remain comes at the moment of your death. And if you've read any near-death experience books or watched any near-death experience discussions on YouTube, there's dozens. I mean, this is the most fascinating topic. I spent a year buying every near-death experience book I could get my hands on and reading all these incredible stories. They read like novels, you know.
Yeah.
And that was probably close to 20 years ago that I did that. But they all have the same kind of thing. You go through a dark light, you go through a tunnel of darkness, and then you come out into the light. And the light feels very beautiful, very loving. And Lazar says that is the light of your soul, your ancient soul. You're coming back home into this glorious light that is very familiar to you because you had it before you were born. And then the world takes it away, right?
Yeah.
Way of the world takes it away. And you go back into that, and eventually, while you are there with the light of your soul, and you might also have your higher self might come personified in form. You might have, if you believe in Jesus, Jesus might come, or other guides. If you're, of another religion, guides from that religion can come, and they help you do something called a life review. And what happens during that time is you're looking at these different aspects of your life, and you're not in control of the information that's coming, but it is coming. It is your soul wanting you to focus your attention on specific events. And you not only see those events, you see the consequences of all those events.
Mm,
So if say you harm somebody, and then you never saw them again, you would not only re-experience the harm that you gave to them, you would see all the events that happened to that other person and other persons down the line that you don't even know.
mm,
You will see it all. And you will also experience it as though that harm was happening to you.
mm,
So this huge thing that is happening. And it's important to understand that that God does not judge anybody.
mm,
He loves us all and equally. It
mhm,
doesn't matter if you're a murderer or a saint. He loves you because we are his innocent children doing the best we can with the rather limited consciousness we've got.
mhm.
And we have unlimited amount of lifetimes to get this right.
Yeah.
And so what happens at the life review is you judge yourself, and you're doing it without an ego. Now
Mm,
here we have egos. On this side of the veil, we have egos, and our egos are full of defensiveness.
mhm.
We don't want to see ourselves as we really are, so we don't look.
Yeah.
Well, on the other side, you don't have an ego anymore, and you're saying, wow, I was really hurt certain people. I
Mm,
hurt my child. I hurt my wife. I hurt the person, the cashier at the grocery store. You know, you're looking and seeing, and
mm,
you're also looking at the good things you did. You're not just looking at the bad. You're seeing it all.
yeah.
Broad perspective. I mean, I've done things in my life I'm still totally ashamed of, and I've forgiven myself for that because I realize I did the best I could with the consciousness I got, and I can't take it back. In my meditations, I might go and apologize and ask for forgiveness, but who knows what the actual outcome of that is, right?
Mhm,
Um, and if you've become wise, if you've seen this higher perspective of reality and you have evolved, and maybe in the earlier part of your life you were an asshole, but in the later part of your life you were kind and caring and help people, your guides and angels, your higher self, your soul, they're all going to ask, what do you think?
mm,
And you're going to decide honestly, I think I need to come back and try it again, or I think I've learned the lessons I need to learn from being physical, and I don't want to continue to evolve that way. You're the one that decides. Nobody makes you.
mm,
And you're going to do it honestly. There's no fooling yourself when you're on the other side. And if you decide that you no longer need to be physical, you will continue your evolution and growth on the other side, because evolution and growth is eternal.
mhm,
It never stops. Just because you're dead doesn't mean you stop evolving. Just
mhm,
because you're dead doesn't mean you stop being a consciousness. You will be a consciousness without beginning and without end eternally.
mm,
And you'll evolve through the planes of existence. And so if you decide you've been an asshole your whole life and you go, wow, I think I have a lot more to learn from being in this particular environment. So you can evolve on the other side and learn certain things. But being physical in this environment is the proving ground.
mhm,
Here is where we have to take what we learned about love and prove that we can be loving individuals in a place where frequently love seems not to be, where there is incredible evils going on, where parents do incredibly abusive things to their children. Not all parents, but some, right? It's, when you're an adult, you see all these horrors going on in the world, and you're asking yourself, how could people possibly do that? Well, this is the world we live in. This is a world where we come to prove to ourselves that we can be loving, forgiving, release ourselves from judgment, forgive everybody, no matter what they've done,
Mhm.
and continue on with our spiritual growth.
Yeah.
There's nothing easy about that.
Mhm.
Nothing easy at all.
Yeah.
But this is the goal. When you have reached that final lifetime, you're going to know it all. You're going to understand what being physical is all about. You're going to understand that this is the plan. It's always been the plan. We chose to come here. No one's forced to come here. Because why? Because we are incredibly courageous souls who chose to come into a very difficult environment and prove to ourselves that we can be loving no matter what.
Mm.
And that's the spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And that's the end of this class.
Mm. Yeah. I have one question. I don't know. I could probably ask it in next class.
Well, go ahead.
What do you think happens? You know how sometimes there's souls that, like for example, spirits or like ghosts or spirits that are still on this realm. What about those spirits? Like, are they on a spiritual journey? Like, how come they're not? How come they didn't come back fully as like a
Well,
physical one?
so you create it all on both sides of the veil, right? You create it all on this side of the veil through your belief system, your thinking, your vibration, your emotional output, and so forth and all. And you create it all on the other side of the veil. And what if you die with the belief there's, once you're dead, you're dead. There's nothing beyond that. There's, where are you going to go? You're going to become a spirit that wanders the earth plane.
Mm,
And because they don't have a body, a lot of them don't even know they're dead. And they do finally figure it out.
mm,
But because they don't have a body, they have absolutely no impact here. And so what do these beings do? They possess people or attach to people. They're also called attachments. They attach to people who are of like mind. So you've died and you're an alcoholic and you never address that. And on the other side, you're wandering the earth plane because you never made it into a heavenly realm because, well, you didn't believe there was one.
mm,
And you're an alcoholic and you really want to drink. So you're going to attach yourself to someone who's an alcoholic.
mm,
And they are going to become a voice in your own mind that accentuates your own voice. So if you're an alcoholic and you're saying, I need a drink, right? I just need a drink. I have a terrible day. I need a drink. There's going to be a voice that says, yeah, I need a drink.
mm,
And so they add weight to your addictions. They add weight to your inability to become clean and sober.
mm,
So, say you're a really bad person, you're a murderer, rapist, child abuser, whatever,
mm,
and you believe in hell. You are going to create a hell-like experience, whatever that means for you. And at a certain point, and this is what everybody when people have near death experiences, some people have heaven like near death experiences and some people have hell like near death experiences. And what happens to the people who have hell like near death experiences, like they can go into the lake of fire and
mm.
there's all kinds of other people in there screaming and yelling because they're being eternally burned up and all this stuff. All you have to do is say, help me, God, because
Yeah.
that's what it's all about. Help me, God. And God will come take you out of that lake of fire and help you, your higher self, your soul. See, they all love you. All these higher parts of you love you. They don't want you to be trapped in a hell-like experience forever. What good would that do?
Mm, yeah. Yeah. You
None.
not evolve.
Yeah, you can't possibly evolve in that. That you're a part of your soul. You think
Mhm.
a part of your soul wants a part of itself to be in a lake of fire forever? No. So they will be taken out of that experience. And there are places on the other side. They're like hospitals. They're like psychic hospitals, and
Mm,
and places where you can be repaired and where guides and angels will come and nurture you and love you, help you understand. And
mm,
once you have that understanding, eventually you'll reincarnate again, but you will have to re-experience some of the same things that made you that way in the in the lifetime that sent you to hell,
yeah.
right? Because it's all about you choosing to make another decision.
Mm,
And we have time is eternal. I know that sounds weird, but we've got gobs of it.
yeah.
So you can have thousands upon thousands of lifetimes and believe me, you'll begin your evolutionary journey
Mm,
eventually.
yeah.
Um, and then there, what Lazarus has told us, if you're a Christian and you believe that Jesus is going to be there when you die and you're going to go into a Christian heaven because only Christians go to heaven, right? In that paradigm. Well, guess what? You'll go to a Christian heaven and the streets will be made of gold and,
Mm,
all the things that they believe.
mm,
And then eventually you'll get bored with that
yeah.
and want to continue your evolution and growth.
Mm,
And Jesus will be right there to help you do it.
yeah.
Your higher self, your soul, they can all appear to you in any way that they feel will best get through to you, and you will continue your evolution and growth.
Yeah. And that really resonates with me because I've thought, even when I was younger and I was in a Christian environment and growing up in a Christian school, I always kind of considered the theory that I'm like, what if you go, like when you die, what if you go where you believe? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what if there's, for example, because I always thought like, well, where do Buddhists go, or where do
Mm-hmm.
Sikhs go, or where do there's other religions that don't believe
Mm-hmm.
in heaven, or their heaven is a different, completely different than our
Mm-hmm.
heaven. I'm like, where do they go? Or what if they never learn about our Christian God? Do they go to hell because they don't know who God is?
Right. Well, I have done some research, and what I've discovered is every one of those belief systems, whether it's Buddhism or Hinduism or Muslim or even native traditions, they all believe in some form of heaven and some form of hell.
Mm,
It is not just the domain of Christianity.
yeah.
Everybody believes that. And that is a human construct because we believe that when you're guilty, you need to be punished
Hmm.
rather than be given more love and more healing.
Yeah.
That's deep in our psyche. You are bad, you need to be punished. And so they think that, people say, we're created in the image of God, but what humans have done is we've created God in our own image.
Hmm. Yeah.
And God is not us.
Yeah.
He would never do that to his children. But he does want us to grow up and be responsible.
Yeah. And I've always thought like, well, if we go to hell, like we're just gonna suffer for eternity and stay there forever. Like,
Yeah,
I'm like, what I'm like, what growth or what good, what benefit? Like, you're just gonna
right.
sit there and suffer for the ends of the
Time,
world? Like, that just didn't make sense to me.
it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But people are taught that, and they're taught that from childhood. And
Hmm.
so that's what they believe. And I had an aunt, she died probably 25 years ago.
Hmm.
And she had done something. I took care of her until she died. I've done a lot of caregiving in my life. And um, she and I would talk about spiritual things, especially she was terrified of dying. She had grown up a Christian in a Christian family, terrified of dying. And I had found out eventually that she had had sex with her best friend's husband.
Mm.
And she thought she was going to go straight to hell. And it was really sad.
Yeah.
It was really sad seeing her go through that. I'd be scared to die too if I thought that.
Yeah.
Instead of actually forgiving herself
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
doing something that later on she realized was not a kind and decent thing to do,
Hmm.
instead of going through a growth period of feeling remorse,
Yeah.
I'm going straight to hell.
Yeah.
She died of breast cancer,
Mm.
and that's what she had to look forward to.
Yeah.
And that's That belief is incredibly harmful.
Mm,
So what Lazarus says is that when you're sick, you need more love and more healing, not more punishment. That doesn't mean that people shouldn't be held responsible for the bad deeds they do. They need to be held responsible, but you don't hate them for it. You don't judge them for it. You just realize that, wow, something bad must have happened to them in their childhood
mm-hmm,
to cause them to be this way. And what can we do to help them reform and help them to evolve and to grow?
mm-hmm. Yeah, because in a way, we're all a product of our environment.
That's right. And instead, we just say, throw them in the prison, throw away the key,
Mm-hmm,
put them in the electric chair. Well, what good does that do? They're just going to come back and do the same thing all over again.
mm-hmm.
Different lifetime, different form, same content,
Yeah.
because they eventually have to make another decision.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully they create another lifetime in which the form isn't quite so hard
Yeah.
that they can't overcome it, or they'll make contracts with people on the other side that you're going to come into my life at such and such a time to help me evolve. We're planning it out before we come in. But
Yeah.
when you're a young soul and you're not dealing with very advanced guides on the other side, you don't think about that. You
Yeah.
don't think about how you're going to plan it out. I mean, once you get to be an old soul, you plan it out very carefully. Like
Mm-hmm.
for me, it was like, I'm going to awaken in my late 30s. I'm going to have the Course in Miracles. It's going to come to me immediately. Then I'm going to have Lazarus, and then, it was like these things weren't coincidences.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I began reading the Course in Miracles, it spoke to me at such a deep, deep level that I just became so enamored with this book. And the same exact thing happened to me when I began to work with Lazarus. But the Course in Miracles, all Christian terminology, which I had no knowledge of because I didn't go to a church as a child. My parents weren't religious. But I quickly realized, well, this is a Christian book, but it's not the typical Christian
Yeah.
book. Um, and then I started working with Lazarus. All he talks about is the goddess.
Mm-hmm.
He only uses normal terminology, no religious terminology at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm studying with Lazarus constantly, and I'm also reading the Course in Miracles constantly, putting the two of them together, creating a synergy of the two, and of course getting a meaning out of both of them that's uniquely my own
Mm-hmm.
because of that.
Yeah.
Do you think I didn't plan that out?
Yeah. You're like, okay, I'm gonna come back, but this time I'm gonna do it like this because it's, like you have the cause and effect already
Figured
set.
it out.
Hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. And I know I have X, Y, and D karma to deal with, that these
Hmm.
things are going to happen in my childhood. And how am I going to deal with that karma? How am I going to evolve beyond it?
Yeah.
Forgive myself, and so forth and so on. Planned it all out.
Hmm.
So did you.
Yeah.
You maybe
Yeah.
don't know it yet, but you will.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things, especially like just for my age, like there's a lot of things that I don't know yet. And it frustrates me a little bit because I'm like, I'm at that mental level, but experience wise and physically wise, I'm not.
Mhm.
And like for example, doing tarot readings and reading the Bible and reading, different books that I've studied, and especially like, starting lessons with you, and all these things have helped my conscious growth in a
Mhm.
way where I'm like, okay, like what's next? That's
Mhm.
another thing that I deal with, is feeling rushed. I
Mhm.
always try to rush
Yeah.
my growth,
Yeah.
and
Everybody does.
yeah, I'm guilty of that. I still am. I really need
Mhm.
to fix that, but I get kind of frustrated. I'm like, why am I still here? Like I'm ready to go more. Like I
Right. Uh-huh.
to go forward. Like why am
Mhm.
I still like I feel like I'm in the same position. Um, I'm like, okay, like I gotta read something else. And then when I rush myself, I notice I don't focus on the material as good as I should because
Mhm.
I'm trying to rush it. I'm trying to skim through it. So
Right.
I have to
Mhm.
remind
Right.
myself, like, slow
You,
down.
you just have to remember it. Everything comes in God's timing.
Yeah.
And you planned it out before you were born.
Yeah.
When you could see a higher perspective, we can't see a higher perspective. I talk about making the bridge over into higher consciousness and by understanding all these things, but when we're out of body, we really see it all,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so you planned it out so that you would be at certain maturity levels
Hmm.
before certain events happened.
Yes.
And you drew me into you at
Mhm.
the age of 19. And I have to say, hopefully without a lot of arrogance, I'm highly unusual therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was worried of. I was actually worried of that because I've always wanted to try therapy, but for example, my mom had a really bad experience. My aunt had a really bad experience with therapy. And I was like, and I'm very spiritual and I'm kind of different than a normal teenager who's just going through life based on what they're told. And I was like, I really don't want I want somebody that understands my my spiritual level. And I was like, I hope I don't get someone that's just going to tell me like certain things that I don't think are going to
Right.
benefit me. And
Right.
I'm like, oh, like this is perfect, like you
Hmm.
get where I'm coming from in a sense.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
yeah.
And it came at just the perfect time, because I want to get this information out to the world. I'm 70 years old. I want to give it away. I want the world to have it.
Yeah.
But I don't have the technical skills that you have.
Hmm.
Right? I don't know how to put things on the internet, and I have no interest in learning. That would be like me trudging through mud or
Yeah.
something. Whereas, oh, you learned all this in a high school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I grew up with the technology.
Right. And you're good at figuring things out. It's like, well, this is the perfect setup.
Yeah. Yeah.
We benefited each other.
Hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, I love you,
I love you too.
Yvette. Okay, that's the end of class number 3.5.
Yes.
Class 3, part 2.
And are we next class is gonna be on
Personality drive.
okay.
And that's I may have to divide that up into 2 parts because there's 9 personality drives and there's a lot to say
Yeah.
about each one of them. And I want people to be able to get a sense of, oh, this is my personality drive.
Mhm.
This is
Yeah.
what drives me down the road of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, you wanna put as much detail and relatability.
Right, exactly. So we'll see how far we get.
Okay. All
And if
right.
we don't finish it all, we'll come back for the rest of it the next time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's easier to split it than just to try to cram it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching.